I want to talk about org charts today, but I want to talk about submission to the org chart. And this really has to do with the discussion about roles. And I want to relay a story that happened a couple weeks ago. I was meeting with a group. It was a pretty large ownership group. We had 6 owners in the room, 7 owners in the room. And we were together for an all-day planning session. And we were talking about where each owner was going to fulfill a role in the organization, like who was going to be doing what. And so you're familiar with a typical organization chart, right? And so you might have the CEO up here, and then you have all of these folks who report. And then you'll have folks under them, maybe managers. Eventually you get down to the bottom of the line, and you've got the people who are doing the production work, who are making things happen, right? So we were talking about what roles are these people, what roles are these owners going to fill? And like I said, we had a pretty large ownership group. And one of the things that we had to discuss was, who's going to call the shots in terms of major decisions? Well, right now, the owners are going to make most of those major decisions together. There's majority owners that will lead the way on some things, and there's operational owners who will reach consensus about what are the major directions that need to go. So this is still going to be kind of a group function, right? And that's okay. I mean, we're talking about major CEO level things. You're talking about long-term direction strategy. When you get into the operational details, there does need to be a single person who's responsible for the different things that happen within a department, who's going to be held accountable for executing certain pieces of the strategic plan, is specifically what we were talking about. And so as we went through the exercise of talking about where each person's gifts and abilities and competencies and what they like to do and what they're best at, as those things were ticked off, we were able to say, well, this person's going to fill this box, and this person's going to fill this box, and this person's going to fill this box, right? And we got all these boxes checked, right? But there were some people in the room who didn't have a box yet. And as we talked through, there were actually some people who weren't in the room, who were just employees, who were not owners, and they were going to be filling some of these boxes, right? Because that's where their gifts and abilities sat. And we're also thinking long term, and these owners have an exit strategy where they're going to exit to passive ownership, or they may exit entirely. We're not quite sure yet. But they recognize that there's some key people in the organization right now who are employees who are going to move up, and they're going to fill these spots. And so we're going to go ahead and start to put them in these spots now, so that long term we're positioned for our exit, which is a very, very smart thing to do. Start thinking long term about where people are going to be able to serve for the longest amount of time. Make sure that you give them the leadership authority and the ability and the training and all that stuff, so you have a smooth transition when you do decide to implement your succession plan or your exit strategy or whatever that is. They were ticking all the boxes in terms of intelligently thinking about the future of the business. But it just so happened that in one of these boxes where an employee sat, when we talked about where the abilities and the need was for one of the owners, was to step in to this box right here. And what's interesting about this is that this owner is now submitting himself to be accountable to this person who essentially works for him. This person is an employee. Long term, they're going to be in this position because this is what they're really good at. And short term, there's a need for somebody to fill this position at an operational level. And so this owner stepped up and says, that's me. It only makes sense for me to be here. And so we talk sometimes about, you're going to see the extent of my artwork ability here, right? Maybe it's one person. We talk about the different hats that owners wear, right? And so what this owner was doing is he was taking off the ownership hat. And he was saying, you know what? The fact that I'm an owner doesn't have anything to do with the fact that this role needs to be fulfilled. What I have to be aware of is that I have an employee hat too. I'm an operating owner, meaning I work in the business. I get a W-2 from the business for the services that I provide Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I'm an employee, and that's where I need to be. I need to be here as an employee. What stood out about this, I don't see this happen a lot, but I really commend this group, and I specifically commend this individual for putting his ego aside and saying, you know what, it doesn't really matter if I'm up here at this level. The business as a whole needs me in this role right here. And that does not diminish my ownership hat at all. In fact, I'm demonstrating that I wear the ownership hat very, very well by choosing to put myself into this employee role here. And even though it means I'm going to be accountable to somebody who ultimately works for me. When we talk about the difference between the ownership hat and the employee hat, and providing venues for owners to take off the employee hat, step into a room, do strategic planning, do critical thinking, work on the business, that's normally how we talk about changing the two hats. What was impressive about this was that during that exchange as owners, this person recognized the employee hat that they needed to wear, and they stepped in and they wore it. And the business is going to do very well because of it, because they have the right people in the right spots, and it's not about ego. So if you take a lesson from that, maybe it's that you look at your organization chart and you go, you know, maybe I should submit myself and put myself under the authority of somebody who essentially works for me, because that's the role that I need to play for the business long term. And it's going to help you with succession, it's going to help the business grow, etc. So I thought that was an interesting thing I got to see in real life. Love to bring that stuff to you guys. And I hope you find similar opportunities too, to submit yourself to the org chart essentially and put the ownership hat on in a very smart way.